Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Area 51.
Hello everybody, welcome back.
So in today's episode, we have a special guest. We're joined by lawyer extraordinaire Jonathan Wasden. For all those who don't know him, I'm sure most of you already do. Jonathan is the Immigrant Society's secret weapon. He has won several cases against USCIS and has brought about sweeping reform to have helped the immigrant population in way too many ways. I'm sure most of you have also benefited from it, even if you didn't know that he was the reason behind it. Thanks for joining us today, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I don't know if I told you, Sanjay, it was a purely organic way in which John and I connected. You remember we had Vidyut on as a guest, right?
Yeah.
So I put a post out about her movie and went on a rant saying how much I hated the term alien and how it pissed me off.
Okay.
I've been following John for a long time now. So I tagged him on it because I was like, I wanted some inputs from different people spread across industries. And I think this is testament to the fact that how committed John is to the cause. Instead of just commenting on that post, he sent me an IM. I've got some great topics for you to talk about if you ever need stuff for your podcast. I was like, hell yeah.
Okay.
We got on a call and I was like, wait, John, are you comfortable coming on and talking about this yourself? and
That's
here we
awesome.
are.
And at least based on some of the discussions we had before, I think this is going to be really insightful for a lot of folks. And it was super insightful for me. And I'm hoping you felt the same way, Rahul.
And scary. Yeah, I was pretty scared.
Well, that's why John's here. So, we've got the superhero.
Yeah, we've got the superhero. So let's start with your origin story, John, since we used the word superhero. Let's start with the origin story. You started off on the other side, the dark side. Could you give us a little more information on that and how you progressed to where you are now?
Yeah, I'm about the most least likely immigration attorney you can imagine. I started off, I went to law school and I owed the government some time. So I went into the JAG Corps right after law school. So I was in the military for 7 years and then got out when I was in DC. And I was looking for a job in the Justice Department, and the Office of Immigration Litigation was hiring. I knew this much about immigration law, absolutely nothing. And so, which actually ended up being a benefit because instead of going off of conventional wisdom, every single case I got, I had to do a deep dive, and I had to figure out, what's the real answer here, not what the agency is telling me the answer is. And so that was very useful, that whole process. And then I went in-house with USCIS and was working on employment-based issues with them and would do some analysis of litigation cases. And time again, I would notice that all of their policies in the employment-based were targeted at eliminating the IT staffing company employees or making life as hard as possible for them as they could.
Okay.
And so I said, if we get sued on this, we're going to lose. And their response was, we don't have to worry about the Indians ever suing us. And so,
wow.
When the Trump administration came in and I could no longer stomach being in the government on the immigration side, the first place I started looking was the Indian IT companies and found the trade organization that represents them. And, the rest is history.
This has a very Star Wars-like story, You started off with the Empire and then you move over to the rebels. But I love it.
Yeah. You've been with USCIS for, 15, 16 years before you made that jump?
No, so I was with USCIS for about 7 years. And I was with the Justice Department for 5 years and military for 7.
Gotcha. I actually, when I looked you up, I found out that there were quite a number of cases that you've fought representing the Immigrant Society against USCIS and you won. Could you give us a brief insight into a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. So, with ITServe, who is the one that's, backed a lot of the litigation that's impacting the H-1Bs, they contacted me back in, I think, early 2018. And in early 2018, the Department of Homeland Security had just posted a change on their website that said that if you are doing third-party placement, you're prohibited from using OPT and CPT students. The way they did that, the way they created that prohibition was illegal. And so we filed an emergency motion because, there's billions of dollars on the table with this program. And so we filed an emergency motion to block it. And thankfully, I took screenshots of everything. And the 13th day of 14, they had to respond to us in court. They changed their website back to what it was and told the court, we don't have that policy. so my trust in the government dropped. And I responded back with screenshots. It's like, yeah, they did.
You're like that angry ex, John.
I have one.
You took screenshots of everything. It's like, no, you did. No, you can't delete it. I have it. Oh, that's funny. Oh my God.
But I'd like to dig a little bit deeper there. So were you contacted by, these staffing firm folks after they found out about this in the DHS, or was that while you were working with them itself?
So I was actually trying to work with them for a long time and convince them to go to court.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they had gone to court back in 2010 with the employer-employee relationship memo, the Neufeld memo.
Right.
And
okay.
the firm that they had doing that case didn't do a great job. And so they lost in dramatic fashion. Now, that's one of the memos that we got invalidated in the IT serve case. And so convincing them to go to court was actually harder than convincing the judge that we were right. So just getting them over that hurt.
I think there is a natural fear, right, John?
Not all cultures are the same, right? So I grew up in the Western U.S. during the Reagan administration, where we had a very much screw the federal government mentality, fight back against authority. And that was just in our blood.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just very natural just to tell them to pound sand. Now, not all cultures are the same. And so a lot of cultures are much more deferent to authority, and they're a little more cautious when dealing with authority.
Right. I think at least from our perspective, or my perspective coming from India, there's this natural deference to the government. There's a lot of historical context around that as well, because when India became independent, we were a really poor country, and you pretty much had to depend on the government for anything, jobs, universities, hospitals, healthcare, whatever. The US, it's been very different. So yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Plus, you're adding on to the fact that you're an immigrant, right? You're not a citizen.
Exactly.
You don't have a lot of the rights. You don't have that confidence, pretty much. I'm sure a few generations down, if they've been born and brought up here, for first generation, I think it's the fear that you're painting a target on your backs, right? And that's a question I had for you, John. Are we painting a target on our backs if we go ahead and pursue legal action against the government?
If you are, it's in a good way. Taking a step back, you look at the American experience. We were upset with oppressive government, so we fought against the British. We created the Administrative Procedure Act, which basically encourages the people to sue the government if they don't like what it's doing. And so litigation, challenging decisions, challenging policy is really just the cost of doing business in the government. They don't take it personal, and they don't, come after people. What I will say is, when I was at USCIS, sometimes I would get potential litigation cases, and they were marked potential litigation case. And I'd read through the file, and I'm like, why is this a potential litigation case? I'm like, oh, that law firm sued us before in the past. Be really careful. Don't deny it. We don't want to be in litigation again.
Oh, wow.
And so they were terrified of it. The lesson I learned in USCIS is the more aggressive you are, the better you're going to be treated.
So it's like my gun's bigger than your gun kind of scenario. Wow.
Oh, that's
I never thought of it like that,
Yeah. This is why we loved having you here on this episode, because for the first time, I think we are getting to see the internal workings of USCIS. For right now, it's this huge mountain where we are standing on literally sea level, and we're just assuming what things they do there, and it's very fascinating to hear about the inner workings.
Yeah, trying to make sense of it using logic will never work. You have to really put your government employee on and figure out what their motives are for everything that they do. It's counterintuitive.
So now that we've spoken some of your past victories, there's quite a few. This was just one of them. John's done some significant work in getting work permits for non-immigrant spouses, for concurrent adjudication, and those are some pretty big wins. Now that we've crossed that, what are some concerns, according to you, that need to be addressed or that need to be spoken out because they're not being given that spotlight that it deserves?
So I think the biggest concern people should have is the amount of data that USCIS, the State Department, and Department of Labor are gathering on them. They are just sucking that data in and then storing it in a consolidated consular database that all those different agencies have access to. And
Okay.
Something DHS puts in the system can be used by the Department of State. And what we're seeing, through the site visit process, they're getting information, putting it into the database, and site visit information is popping up years later in future adjudications for like a green card. And then also when you go for stamping at the consulate, the information people are freely giving to the government during the site visit process is boomeranging back and killing them. And so the thing that people need to realize regarding site visits, the H-1B, FDNS site visits, is that they do not have to participate. It is a voluntary program. Their website says it. I screenshot the website and sent it to every officer that I engage with in email. I'm like, thank you for inviting us to your voluntary program. We won't be playing. So it's just important to know that you have options. You don't have to sit there and give them all the information. And frankly, you shouldn't, because anything you give them, they're going to be looking for a way to spin to harm you.
So I looked this up. Actually, Sanjay, after John told us about this yesterday, because this was a revelation for me, right? I did not know this was voluntary. And I looked it up. I went to the website after he told me, and it's there. This is a voluntary activity. You can say, hey, you know what? No, we don't want you in. And it's written that in such cases, the personnel has to make do with whatever information they can collect and then leave.
Wow.
That's insane, right? It was never communicated by anybody.
I mean, I don't think they have any incentive to communicate that to us, because obviously it won't work for them. It's like in the movies when I hear when somebody's arrested, or anything that you say can be used against you in a
the Miranda
court of law. And yeah, the Miranda right.
But don't employers have an incentive to actually educate their employees about this? I mean, I understand why USCIS would not do it. Yes, it's against them. But if I was an employer and I had like 15 immigrants, I would tell them.
Definitely. And that process is starting to happen. The problem is, honestly, most of the immigration lawyers were just saying, give them everything they want, but make them go away, and not giving, aggressive advice to their clients. That's changing, where people see what they're actually using that information for, and they're fighting back and they're pushing back. But, educating, like what I do with client companies that I do training for their employees, and I go through and I'm like, this is what happens in a site visit. This is what the officer's trying to do. This is why they're trying to do it. This is how they're trying to manipulate you, and just let them know what their rights are and what they should do. And the telling statistic for me is, for the companies that we've represented and told USCIS basically to pound sand, there's been 0 revocations, because they can't revoke a visa unless they have a basis. And if you don't give them that information, they won't have a basis.
Okay. So one question I had towards this database, the Consular Consolidated Database, I understand, my perspective may be wrong. After 9/11, when DHS was created, the idea was that there'd be this agency that works very well among other US federal agencies, to share information regarding intelligence threats. So would this database come under some program like that, or did this start at a much later point of time?
It started later. So
Okay.
I want to say that they started what was called interoperability back in 2008. They had 3 rounds of interoperability till 2010, 2011. Then the system was fully up and running.
Oh, okay. And so what was the reasoning for something like this? Was it just specifically for immigration-related cases, or like fraud related to immigration?
So it's just storing everything about immigration cases that occurs. It stores petitions, it stores LCAs, it stores everything. So when you go for stamping, they have access to all of that information. And it also has places where you can flag in the system a finding of fraud or misrepresentation. And if you're flagged in the system, you might get your visa extension if you're in the United States. If you're flagged in the system, coming through the port of entry is going to be almost impossible. And it's also going to be almost impossible to get a visa at the consulate.
So I've got a 2-part question, right? Part 1, isn't this illegal to store data like this?
To store data, no. As long as they comply with what's called the system of record notification, it's a requirement that you disclose to the public what's in your database, why you're storing it, who has access to it, what are the release parameters. As long as you do that, you can maintain a database as the federal government. Now, the way that you're using the database is the legally problematic part, where they're entering fraud findings against people without notice and an opportunity to respond. That part has some real legal problems.
So, part two of the question, if this database is somehow hacked, isn't that putting identities and information of literally every immigrant in US at risk? Because it's going to have everything, right? When I took a sneak peek at it, I saw it has biometrics, it has facial recognition, it has every possible information that you have on every immigrant in or alien in US in that database. So it's like a one-stop shop repository of everything you need.
Yeah. And it even has, a lot of times people will willingly give tax returns in a site visit. And so it has tax return information in it a lot of times for individuals. So there is a lot of compromising data that's in the database. I would like to think that the government has high-end cybersecurity people, but knowing everything I do about the government, everything is low-end and less effective. So I don't know. I can't give you any sense of security over that.
Oh my God. So I actually spent some time going down to rabbit holes, Sanjay. One thing I saw is they've released these privacy impact assessment reports on the database, right?
Okay.
And one thing that I saw is that one source of information was titled social media indicators. And that actually concerned me quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So are they like scanning your tweets and your Facebook or Instagram accounts and pulling information and storing it? Is that like a fair understanding of that statement? Because they didn't really give a lot of information on what they use, but they just said social media indicators as a source of information. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely they are. They're vacuuming in all the information that's accessible. Ordinarily, you would need a warrant to do that. If the government's going to go in and, take Facebook's information that you have in there that's password protected, that would require a warrant. Except that all of these big tech companies have contracts with the federal government for IT services, and part of a rider in most of those contracts is that they'll share data with the government.
Oh, wow.
And so if a third party gives it to the government, then they don't need a warrant. So that's how they get around some of these issues.
Okay. And plus with the fact, I know like one of the things, for example, if you're filling out a DS-160 these days, there's a question where you need to provide your social media handles as a part of, the application process itself. So I'm thinking maybe we are probably agreeing somewhere to like provide some sort of information from our side voluntarily.
Is it voluntary? If you don't, you have to fill it. I don't remember the phrase being worded as, hey, fill it out if you want.
Yeah, the DS-160 is dangerous because if they ask a question, you have to answer it truthfully, or they could give you a fraud finding themselves. And there's not much you can do if the State Department gives you a fraud finding and denies your visa. You're kind of stuck. So you're looking at it and you're thinking, this isn't really legal, but if I don't give them what they want, then I'm not going to get my visa. It's a no-win situation.
As a normal person, how can I find out if I have any fraud findings against me? Do I have access to that information?
So the only way you're going to find out if DHS has entered in a fraud finding against you is when you go to the consulate for stamping and they say, sorry, DHS has a fraud finding against you. We can't approve your visa. That's pretty much the only way you'll find out. We've done FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, and the government does everything in their power not to disclose the existence of fraud findings. It is very difficult to know whether or not you have a fraud finding. Now, I can tell you that there is a large group of people that absolutely do have fraud findings and don't know it. So, for example, the Wireclass, Integra, and Will, and there's a fourth company involved in that, where they had these OPT scams going, and everybody who signed up with them for employment was on a list that the government got during a criminal investigation. And every one of those people is slowly, methodically getting a fraud finding. So when they go back for stamping, they're realizing they can't come back in. And that was entered by DHS, but they never gave the individual an opportunity to respond and say, this wasn't fraud because in most cases, it's legally not fraud. It's not misrepresentation because you don't communicate directly with the government on these cases. Challenging those fraud findings If you know they exist, there's a way to do it. It's difficult, but it can be done. And you can also preemptively do it.
They've actually structured in a way that literally everything is against you, right? Because you're now out of the country. Access to resources that would have been a lot more easier when you're within the country is taken out. You just get that notification saying, hey, you know what, there's something against you. Your visa is revoked or you're not getting an extension. So the system's designed to actually create issues for you, not make it easier for you to resolve it in short.
So the system is designed to be fair, actually. And the system is designed to give you notice and an opportunity to respond in situations and give you some procedural due process. The way DHS is using the system is very much counter to the way the system is designed. And so what they're doing intentionally is they realize in any decision that they make in the U.S. can be challenged in court. And most of their decisions are crap. And so their odds of winning in court are super low. So instead of taking that risk, what they're doing is without telling anybody, they're putting a fraud finding in there so that the consulate can do all the dirty work and deny the visa because you can't sue the consulate.
Oh, shit. That's right.
So as a follow-up to that, with this new pilot program that's coming up by the State Department for H1 and L1 renewals, where you can get it stamped while you're stateside, doesn't that probably is a big setback for them, right?
So you look at the structure of the immigration agencies. USCIS determines eligibility for the visa category. The State Department determines admissibility. That admissibility determination is not going to be that much different. The only difference will be that it could potentially be challenged in court because it was done in the U.S. and it wasn't a consular decision. So yeah, that's the break point. But it remains to be seen what the details will be like on that program and how well it'll be actually run and administered. But it would at least give you a heads up that you have a fraud finding earlier, before you leave the country and you lose all your rights and access to courts.
I mean, I think it's a big step in the right direction, right? I mean, from no access to any fraud findings to at least being notified about it prior to your actual interviews, the consulate. I think that gives us enough time to prepare for it and actually be well equipped to fight it. If it happens.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's still a big question.
If it happens. Right? What are some fraud findings that you've come across that you've actually successfully pushed through and gotten them cleared?
So the most frustrating ones are where there's a company that the owners get prosecuted for immigration fraud, H-1B fraud typically. And they go through after the conviction of the employer and they pull all of the cap petitions that company has filed and start revoking them for fraud because the project information wasn't correct or something like that. The problem with that is that fraud finding makes the individual inadmissible to the United States forever. The fraud finding itself, though, the law requires a couple of things. It requires the foreign national to have made a direct communication with the agency. That direct communication must have been in an attempt to get an immigration benefit, and it was knowingly false at the time it was made, and it was material to the outcome of the case. Now, in the H-1B program, you're not ever communicating with the government except for the site visit process. So that's the only place you're really technically vulnerable. But in the petitioning process, you never communicate with them. So you legally cannot commit fraud or misrepresentation. But DHS doesn't like that. They want it to be different. And so they're implementing it that way. But when they get challenged on it, they back down pretty quickly.
So how far back do they go when they need to revoke something? Is it 5 years, 6 years?
The oldest I've seen so far is 13.
They went back 13 years to revoke. Oh my God. The person probably would have just been about to get his green card,
He was. Yeah. That's another one where we sued and they caved and everything went out, was fine after that.
When do you get the green flag? When do you get the signals like, okay, you are finally relieved of all of this stuff? Like, what stage of the immigration process can you say like, oh, you know what, I don't need to worry about any of this stuff anymore?
When you die.
Yeah. When you die or you get your N-400 approved.
Oh, so that's pretty much when you become a citizen. That's the only point of time after which. Okay.
Interesting.
Wow.
You told me an example of the wage being different from what was on the LCA and what was on the tax finding.
Oh, yeah. That one was crazy.
That was so ridiculous.
Yeah. So what they're doing in the site visit process is they're asking for all kinds of wage information. Sometimes they're asking for comprehensive information about all the employees in a company. And then they're going through and they're looking for discrepancies in the wage paid and the wage on the LCA. So I had a client that had a LCA for $120,000 a year. His W-2 said he got paid $119,000 a year, and USCIS revoked his visa because he failed to maintain status for failing to get paid, which is something he had absolutely no control over. Absolutely crazy.
And you know what's the ironic thing is the fact that a large chunk of the organization's operational expenses comes from premium processing fees, right? I think sometime in 2020 or something like that, they were running short of money, so they were allowed to use a huge chunk of the premium processing fees for operational expenses. Literally, it's become the norm now that every petition we file, we pay that extra $2,500 to get a result in 14 days. But we're actually bankrolling site visits, whole bunch of teams going back to petitions like 10, 15 years ago, reviewing those 1,000 pages and finding, oh, wait, I see $50 off. Let's catch these guys.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and that's the sad part because, like, I would have thought the agency is so inundated with so many applications and stuff. Premium seems to be the only way to get a response quickly. Either 15 days or you're waiting for like 6 to 8 months for your petition to get approved or whatever. But I know, John, you mentioned something, before we recorded this about that actually not being the case, that petitions should be typically approved in 30 days or something like that.
Yeah, so a non-immigrant petition should be wrapped up in 30 days. That's what Congress said. When they designed the law, that's what they expected it would take. And, then you fast forward and you have an adjudication as simple as an H-4. And all you have to do is show that you're married and your spouse has an H-1B. And that's it.
Okay.
Two very, very simple things. Okay. That was taking over a year for a while. And it just makes absolutely no sense, especially when they publish data about how long it takes them to adjudicate each individual petition. So determining if you're married to somebody that has an H-1B, according to the agency, takes 12 minutes. And that 12-minute span of time.
And the rest of the 364 days in so many minutes.
Exactly. So there's no justification for why their processing times are so long. It's just government inefficiency and bloat.
You told us that the workforce is like doubled or tripled in the last 5 years, right?
Oh, yeah. So like with USCIS, they have exploded in personnel. They, their argument was, we don't have enough money. They have tons of money. We don't have enough people to do the job. More people than they have ever had, but they're less efficient than they've ever been. And so a great example is they're diverting money away from adjudicating to FDNS. And so FDNS grew from 800 back in 2018 to over 2,000 now. Just exploded.
If they were a startup, they'd get a lot of VC funding at the growth that they've been maintaining. That's pretty much the mantra. You grow your headcount fast enough, that means, you must be doing something right.
And for folks who are not aware, we've spoken about FDNS quite a lot. It just stands for Fraud Detection and National Security, for anyone who's not aware of it. These are the folks that actually do those site visits that we've spoken about in detail. So that's what it stands for, in case you wondered what the acronym is. So do a duplicate H-1B registrations count as a fraud finding in the database? Because I know that especially this year, when they released its statistics, they had a separate column that called out folks who had multiple registrations. Is that a concern for these guys?
So it really depends. And it depends on things that the employee may not know. So if you have company A, company B, company C, they each file 50 petitions, and then they have an overlap of those candidates that is not explainable through random chance, then they're going to flag all those candidates and say that the employers were colluding to increase the odds of selection. The problem is they're putting the fraud findings in. The fraud findings hit the individual, the employee. A lot of times, most times, the employees are totally clueless what's going on behind the scenes. They don't know that their employer has shared their list with, a group of other employers, and they've all filed trying to beat the system. And so the employee ends up getting stuck with the fraud finding and a denial or a revocation of the H-1B for something that they didn't even know was happening.
And I'm glad you pointed this out, John, because based on things I've read on social media, for example, on Reddit or Twitter, there's this general sentiment from folks who are on H-1B, with this complaint that, there's so many people trying to defraud the system, and that's why USCIS is making our life much more difficult But you're clearly stating that like the onus is not on the individual itself. It's pretty much on the company. And then there again, like even if let's say somebody is going and approaching a staffing firm that they want to win the H-1B lottery, they probably have no idea how things are gamed at the LLC or the company level to get this, and that creates a lot of problems for them later on, even though they may not be party to that scheme itself directly.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly right.
Yeah, maybe we should put up this podcast episode on the H-1B subreddit so that, because I've seen a lot of venting for folks who were pretty pissed off about the fact that, this year's lottery.
I mean, think about it though, right? If you've got like less than 10% chance of getting picked and there's a guy who's got picked 5 times.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's
going to hurt.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I totally understand where that's coming, because we've been through that process, right? Like it's super stressful, but it wasn't as bad as it is right now. I'll be honest about that.
When I got picked in 2020, there were around 450,000 people. But fast forward to 2023, 770. That's insane.
A slight increase.
A slight increase.
Just about double.
And it's crazy, right? When you think about it, 9/11 has had such an impact on so many different things. Before that, it was 195,000 to 198,000 or something like that. And talking to John yesterday too, is like prior to that, it was INS, right? And then 2002 or 2003, like John was saying, it was split into like different entities with all different jurisdictions. So a question that I had was it this bad back then as well, pre-split?
I don't think it was as crazy under the INS as it is now. The craziness, I think you can mark up to an echo chamber. USCIS is in their own little echo chamber with their own little limited area where they think nobody challenges their thoughts on what the right procedure is. In the INS construct, everybody was sitting down at the same table together, and if you were crazy, they would tell you. That negative feedback loop is not occurring right now in USCIS.
It's funny you say that, because that whole thought of working in a silo, I had a question. How do people, the officers who are reviewing petitions, right? How do they know if the person in front of them, if it's a specialty occupation, if it's not a specialty occupation? Because I had a friend who had a bachelor's in engineering, another master's in engineering. She's working in an engineering role, and she was given an RFE saying that her occupation or her degree or her expertise is not specialty occupation. Or if you hear thousands of stories of EB1, the extraordinary or Einstein visa petitions. I have a technical background, and still, I don't think I'd be competent or qualified enough to judge a data scientist's achievement or a doctor's achievements for that matter, or a lawyer's. So I just want to know, do they hire specifically saying, hey, you know what, we want to get some oil and gas engineers to sit and, review oil and gas engineering cases, or to get some lawyers to look at lawyer cases? Is that how it works?
Sadly, no. They used to publish the requirements for service center adjudicators on their website. And what wasn't required for any level, and in fact, the guy named Don Neufeld, who was in charge of USCIS for a long time, didn't have a degree. And no degree was required whatsoever for any employee, let alone a degree in the specific specialty that they're in charge of adjudicating for. And so, funny thing is we are challenging some specialty occupation cases in court, and we attached those a couple of times, and then mysteriously disappeared from our website. Never to be seen again.
Oh my God.
That's funny and sad at the same time.
They have no real technical ability or no knowledge or know-how. We had people when I was working in USCIS that were adjudicating appeals of H-1B cases, so the more complicated H-1B cases allegedly. They couldn't map themselves to a printer.
Oh my God. To their defense, like, end of the day, it's a government agency. Let's say you're a law firm. I mean, I'm not talking about immigration itself. You are arguing a person's credibility as an expert or something in court. So you obviously would typically, even though lawyers represent somebody like that, it's not like they know that expert is a credible person. So they probably get a third party to make some sort of assessment, or like have in some education credentials to prove that, right? So I would have thought like the USCIS would either use some system that way, or at least use the basis of that person's, credentials to match it. But it turns out like it's more like throwing darts and seeing where it sticks.
I think I found my post-retirement career. Going to help USCIS. Hopefully by then I'm a citizen without any fraud findings or anything.
Hopefully they have somebody forward thinking enough to realize that they need it.
You need to go back, John.
I think did, I'd be killed on my first day.
I'm assuming, do you still like talk to folks like, are your previous employees? Do you have any good relationships with any friends or stuff who
He's not allowed to take names.
Yeah, I'm just curious about those conversations, if any, like you'd have. Oh man, he's come up with this thing against us, that.
Yeah, so I'm in the witness protection program. But I keep in touch with some of my friends from the Justice Department, and we'll get together and we'll have lunch, and we'll do dinner every now and again. And like I said earlier, the Justice Department, their job is just to defend against lawsuits. They don't take it personal. If it wasn't for people like me, they wouldn't have jobs. And so, as much as they hate that I'm making them do work, at the same time, like, well, I got work because you're making me do it. So you're not too bent out of shape over it.
And that's a really nice perspective that you brought here, because in my mind, I'm still like, even though we understand this system pretty well, because we're talking about this most of the time on the podcast, and I'm still at the back of my head, there's this constant worry, what, if someday I have to fight a lawsuit against the government or something, that's like the last resort. Literally, it's going to be a life or death situation for me.
Well, we've got John now, so...
Yeah, I'm hoping John gives us a discount because, we got him on the podcast.
So I had a question regarding the director. So we all know that, I hope I'm not butchering her name, is Or Jadu. She's of immigrant heritage, right? She's I think she's of Mexican Iraqi heritage. So being an immigrant and heading this agency, I would have thought it might be there'll be a softer kind of approach towards dealing with immigrants. Is that the case, or is that a direction you think we could possibly end in?
Yeah. So no, the dirty little secret is the people that are appointed by Congress really don't have a whole lot of impact on the trajectory of the agency. That's really driven by the career senior executive service people and the GS-15s within the agency. They're the ones that are really setting the tone, and they're the ones that are setting priorities and, perpetuating the culture of the agency. So you have an agency that's been around since 2003, 20 years now, and it has a definite way of thinking. And like I said earlier, it's echo chambered. And then they have a definite way of doing things. And if some outsider comes in and they know that they're only going to be there for a couple of years, and they try and make changes and improvements, the careers will fight that and find ways to delay it and sabotage it because they like the way things are going. So, the sad thing is the director has very little impact on the culture of the agency.
And so would you say that if the Democrats have the upper hand or the Republicans have the upper hand, do you think these things play a role in the direction that the organization, moves towards?
Not for employment-based immigration. Yeah. So for employment immigration is really the redheaded stepchild of immigration. The Democrats love the low-end immigration, the unskilled refugees, people that, they're all about that. But people that actually drive the economy, they're not really supportive of. And the Republicans, well, they're just racist. And so they want to keep as many people out as possible. And so, nobody in Capitol Hill, regardless of the party, is a friend of the H-1B program or a friend of immigrants. And so, that's the situation we're stuck in. You look back in 2010 when they created the Neufeld memo. That was the first, shot at the staffing companies, trying to eliminate staffing companies from the H-1B program. That was an Obama era.
Yeah, I was just about to say that was during Obama's time. Yeah, so whoever thinks that, the Democrats or Republicans are going to save you, no.
So like Obama, Trump, or Biden, you're screwed nevertheless.
Yeah. Bush 1 and Bush 2 were great, though. I mean, they were on high-skilled immigration. They at least understood.
Wow. That's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine mentioned something like this. I think it was during the Bush 2 administration where there was a period where people who were, I'm talking specifically of Indian immigrants who had applied for their green cards literally got it a year later or something because they
reset the clock or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. There was a large group of people who got pretty lucky.
We need Jeb.
Maybe this gives us a reason to get Jeb Bush
on
the podcast. Hey, we'll support you.
think Bush 3 is what we need. So how expensive is it to sue USCIS, John? I mean, I was just curious. You mentioned it. It was just playing in the back of my head. Since Sanjay said, he mentioned the discount thing, and I just played in the back of my head. It's like, how expensive is it? Is it like a long, drawn-out process?
So the good news is that when you're suing under the Administrative Procedure Act, there is no witness testimony, no depositions, no discovery. The only discovery in the case is the government's required to give us the administrative record, which is all the documents that were sent back and forth with the petition. So when it comes down to it, all we're doing, procedural motions and things like that in court, a motion for summary judgment typically, and then an argument with the judge. And so it's a much more streamlined process, but it's still very labor intensive for an individual case, and so it still costs a bit of money. Where we're lucky, though, is that there's so many people that have the exact same issue, because USCIS, they run on a template model system where they're just basically changing the name on a denial and sending it out, and it's impacting a whole bunch of people in exactly the same way. And so that allows us to pull people together into larger cases and lower the per individual cost down quite a bit.
Interesting.
That's pretty cool. On top of that, this is probably a follow-up to a couple of other questions we had before. There's no political party or representative that's probably friendly to employment-based immigration, to employment-based immigrants, to be specific. And so what can we do? What can our listeners do to be better prepared, while being in the system? What's something that, you think would be like the top priority that we need to look at?
Yeah, look for people who are potentially friendly to high-skilled immigration, and volunteer on their campaign, volunteer in their local office, contribute when you can. I think you have to be a citizen to contribute campaign.
I think only if you're a permanent resident, not if you're on a visa.
But if you can do anything like that to try and raise elevate the issue in people's minds by participating in the system, I think that will long term it will help. But as we've seen with Congress, nothing happens terribly quickly, so it would take a while for that evolution to happen.
Okay. And what that's probably more like a high level thing that you can do. What do you think, at an individual or a local or a grassroots level, what do you think works?
So I think the most important thing they can do, individuals can do and companies can do, is just realize what their rights are. That if FDNS comes and does their Gestapo interrogation,
I was hesitant to mention that term earlier when you brought it up, thinking that might be pushing it too much. But now that you've put it out there, it's it's fine.
We're canceled. We're canceled.
It's funny when you deal with some of these people. Some of them are very cool, very practical, rational. They're not bent out of shape. Some of them are insane. And the one that cracks me up is I almost sent him a screenshot of this. Cartman from South Park. You must respect my authority. This guy upset that I wasn't respecting his authority as a high school degree holder that was working at FDNS. And I just wanted to send that screenshot.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Right. So to sum that up, basically, to have the employers partner with lawyers, provide training, or even the fact that give them a call as soon as you hear that they might be coming to visit you or they are at your door. Do not go solo. Don't do it by yourself.
Yeah. And if they come to your door, you don't have to let them into your house. And in fact, you shouldn't. They're not allowed into your house unless you invite them. If they try and barge their way in, my first call would be to the cops. That's a criminal trespass. So you don't have to give them access to your electronics. At the port of entry, that's a different story. In FDNS site visit, they don't have a right to that. I wouldn't give it to them. I wouldn't give them any documentation. I would just take their information, give it to your lawyer, give it to your company, and let them run interference. Because the less you communicate with FDNS, the less likely it is that there will be a fraud finding somehow put against you. And you can control your silence, but what you can't control is how that FDNS officer summarizes your conversation, how he remembers the conversation, or how he quotes you. Because we've seen that happen where it's 180 degrees away from what the truth was. And luckily in those cases, we had email and we were able to send it back and say, no, the officer's lying. This is what
Wow.
really happened. But I mean, you can't really trust that they're going to be accurate with their summaries and their description of your conversations. So the only thing you can do to truly protect yourself is saying, talk to my lawyer.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's good advice, actually. I don't think any of us would have thought of that. Have a lawyer present when we have
Yeah, because somebody like that comes on our doorstep. Like, I'd honestly, until
Panic,
we had this
right?
conversation, would be freaking out. Like, yeah, okay, you know what? Here's whatever you want, and I don't want to mess the equilibrium or change how things are.
Well, and that's their whole tactic, is to intimidate you until you're nervous, and then you're easier to coerce and manipulate when you're terrified.
So tying into that, John, so can companies or folk who are listening, can they reach out to you to see if the companies can work with you or for training or support? I don't know what are the kind of services that you provide to companies. Can folks listening on the podcast, can they reach out? Are you open to taking new clients?
Oh yeah. So for our corporate clients, what we do is we do the training for the employees, and then all site visits on an annual contract are covered. And so it just makes it easier for them. They don't have to, get in touch with their attorney, do a new G28. They just send it to me and I shoot it back, and I either call or send an email to the officer.
You should do one of those lawyer ads that says, if you've got FDNS, call John Wasden.
No, better call John.
Oh yeah, better call John. That's a good.
You can actually tie it to Breaking Bad too. It's I protect you from the one who knocks. Better call John. Yeah, I watch too much TV. Sorry. But yeah, I think that's great. I think we've covered quite a lot.
I'm still processing some of the things we talked about. Because the thing is, it's hard to remain neutral in this conversation, being objective, because we are part of the system as well right now. And so some of these points that you mentioned, that makes me think I need to go back and process some of that.
Could always do a follow-up episode. Probably take questions from people. It probably will hit a soft spot for a lot. It did for me and clearly for you, Sanjay. Like you said, I'm still reeling behind a couple of things that I found. The database that's collecting my information, to the fact that a lot of things that I thought was mandatory is actually voluntary. There's quite a lot of information. I'm sure it's not just us. A lot of other people listening in would feel the same way. So if we get questions in a couple of months, or maybe in a couple of weeks, depending on how it goes, I'd be more than happy to have you back, John.
That'd be great. Sanjay, you said something about staying neutral. So when I was working in USCIS, I was thinking, we don't have enough American kids getting degrees in things that matter. Why are we giving these people the business? This is like national suicide. And that was my big break where I'm I just can't do this anymore. This is contributing to a system that is harming my kids' future. So, high skill immigration is really the only way we're going to stay on top. And that's why I couldn't stay neutral. And I had to leave the government and do something different.
Yeah, from our perspective, the sort of opportunity. Okay, I know this is a bit off topic to what we're talking about, and I think Rahul, you'd understand that well. So both of us, we grew up in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, and it's a great place. But there's so many systemic things when it comes to for example, just growing your career. Like I could be an engineer there, and there'd be somebody who would have a European or an American or a Canadian passport holder who does the same job as me, but just by the equivalency of their passport, they get paid 3 times more. But that does not exist in the United States for all its flaws, for whatever it is. And that opportunity, I think, and that's what probably gets people who are smart and hardworking who want to come here. They'd give up so many other things just to be here for that opportunity. It's just crazy. You would want to find ways to, deny them of that, because they'd give their heart and soul to this place.
Yeah, and they're driving the economy.
Yeah. That's very true. What is it, almost 50% of Fortune 500 companies will have an immigrant founder or an immigrant inheritance or something along those lines.
But thanks for not being neutral, John. I think I speak for almost all of us from our community. Not a lot of people see the injustice and decide to do something about it, but you did. And I think on behalf of every immigrant or every alien who's here, thank you. And we appreciate that a lot.
Well, thank you.
Politicians are supposed to legislate things like this. You're probably doing a better job by, legislation through litigation,
Hey, that could be our next calling, John.
Yeah, I agree with Rahul completely. Thank you so much for doing what you do.
When you said that word neutral and you told the story, I was like, shit, I'm sure a lot of people face not just this injustice, a lot of other injustices, but very few actually make that effort to stand up and say, hey, I'm going to do something about this. So I think it's very impressive.
And thank you so much for taking the time. I know between this episode and the time we spent before, going over some of our questions and stuff. It's probably taken a lot of your time. And I know you live in Colorado, and it's pretty early on a Saturday morning. So thank you so much for all what you've done to spend some time and educate our listeners on the things that you have said. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been a joy. It's been a lot of fun to hang out with you guys virtually.
Yeah, hopefully we get you back, John. Thanks for calling in
Sounds
today.
good. All right, good talking with you.
So it's a wrap for this episode, Rahul.
Yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Give us your feedback. Drop us some reviews. We're always happy to hear from you. Until then, see you in the next episode. Thanks, guys.
Take care, folks.